Great Writers Media.
I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're speaking with author Richard Marman about his thrilling series, McAlister's Way. It follows the action-packed journey of young Downey McAlister as he escapes a brutal boarding school and embarks on a quest to find his missing father in the dangerous landscapes of New Guinea. Along the way, Downey becomes entwined in union wars, the aviation industry, and harrowing adventures with his newfound companions, Mad Monty and Angela. Together, they face formidable challenges and uncover life-altering secrets as they navigate the Central Highlands and the Bismarck Sea. We're delighted to have Richard in the spotlight today. We thank the folks at Great Writers Media for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel. Richard, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. This is quite a series. I could see it becoming a TV series or a number of films, actually, because it's that kind of visual impact and that kind of adrenaline behind it. Tell me how you came up with the idea for Downey McAlister and his wild adventures.
It evolved a bit. When I finished my flying career, I went to university and I studied fine art, graphics design, and all forms of creative writing, fiction, nonfiction. And one of the last units we used to do it, once you finished a unit at the university, was to write a 2,500 word synopsis of your book or first chapter. And for some reason, this one just popped out. And I wrote the chapter, and we went on to write quite a lot. I probably had about 10 units of these 10 first chapters of all different books sitting in a drawer. And then I thought, well, why don't I just write the next chapter and write the next chapter? And the story just grew from there. I had a lot of experience flying in my Air Force days in New Guinea. And so it was a great backdrop, and there were lots of things going on there. And of course, you put flying, adventure, danger, bad weather, and throw in some pirates, you can't go wrong.
Exactly. Well, it sounds like you've had a very intriguing life filled with real life adventures, so it only makes sense that you put some of them down on paper. So some of the stuff in these books were inspired by real life adventures?
Oh, absolutely. There's one scene I do in the book where Downey and his friends find this Japanese bomb dump, and that and they use that to help them in the story. And that's something that actually happened to me back in early 70s when we flew a bomb disposal team up to a little airport just on the north coast of New Guinea, and there was this bomb dump just in the grass, the long grass. Grass is about this high, so you can't see it. And the locals knew it was there, but they didn't bother telling anybody. So what we did was took the bomb disposal, got guys in there, and they're jumping all over these bombs that looked old and rusty. And in the end, they said, "Oh, we'll just have to blow them up." And so they did. They just blew them up one at a time, and there were, I don't know, about 100 of them there. And so I used that. I thought that's a great little idea, and I could use that, and it helped our characters along the way. And there's, the flying scenes, although I never flew, I flew more modern airplanes. I flew C-130s, but the flying scenes are based on things that I've seen flying through a cyclone, or what you call them, hurricanes. I actually flew through a developing one of those one day when it was into the eye. Wow. And so I was able to be fairly realistic about the way I was describing things.
Wonderful. How many books are there in the McAlister series?
1, 2, 3, 4. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 or 10. Okay. There are 4 main books that start with Downey and lead to a conclusion, and then there are 3 prequels and 1 sequel, and they're kind of standalone books. So there's a good lot of reading there. It took me 10 years to write them all and to get them out in print.
Wow. Amazing. Must have been an enjoyable, event in your life, living in that world of creating Danny's, adventures, right?
I loved it, and it wasn't hard. Finding his adventures was, or getting them going, just seemed to happen. I worked to a formula that I thought that around 2,500 words is a good amount of words for somebody to read. It's about a 10-minute easy read. So if someone's going to bed, they'll read a chapter, or they'll say, oh, well, that was pretty good, I'll read another one. But you don't feel, some books I read, and they've got some chapters very short, some chapters are very long, and I sort of start a long chapter, I think, especially late at night and go to bed, I think I'm never going to finish this one. So I wanted it to be in nice bite-sized pieces, and I wanted each chapter to leave you thinking, oh dear, how are they going to get out of this one?
Right.
And so that was kind of the formula I used.
Wonderful, wonderful. Were you inspired by another writer? Were you inspired by films or a series that you watched at one point in your life?
Oh, you always are. You can't say, anybody can't say they're not inspired. Me, I love action movies. I Raiders of Lost Ark, when that came back out in 1981, I thought, wow, this is just the best movie ever. And then I'd always, when I started reading, I was probably about 11, 12 years old, and I read the British adventure authors like Alistair MacLean and Hammond Innes, and so I love that genre. No, excuse me, got from early morning frog in throat. I just love that genre of adventure. And when I was at uni, I was discussing with one of the professors about young adult males, and they weren't reading a lot. They were playing a lot of video games, they were watching a lot of shows. So initially, I wrote these books as that is my market. But in some ways, I found that the most response I've got are from people, baby boomers, who were young people at that time. So it's got quite a broad brush of appeal for anybody who's interested. But the main thing is they're just fast-paced adventures. I'm not out to preach to anybody. I'm not out to sell them a message. I just want them to finish the book and say, wow, I really enjoyed that one. I'd really like to I'd really like to read the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I touched on it a little bit in the beginning that I thought this would be a terrific series of films or a terrific TV series. Have you thought about that at all?
Earlier, we approached a South African company, my original publisher, and we didn't get a response, but it's certainly something I've thought about. And oh, wouldn't that be great? I'm just waiting for Steven Spielberg to come knocking on the door, ring me out.
It has Steven Spielberg written all over it. I mean, he kind of was born out of the whole movie serial type of adventure. And Danny McAlister kind of has that feel about him, that he's kind of a classic character in this series of adventures, He
is. I sort of got to like him a lot as I was writing, and he was developing, he was growing, and I got to really like him. I even got to like the bad guys, and so and of course Angela is his love interest, and she's just there to drive him crazy. So there's a lot of real interaction between them, and it resolves itself at the end of the fourth book. Right. So I wrote the four in one block set in the 1950s, and it's told as a flashback where Danny's telling his grandson in modern times. It's first started in 2010, about back in his time in the 50s, and it actually resolves itself back in 20th century or 21st century.
Okay. Are you working on any other McAlister adventures?
I can. I really would like to see. Honestly, I'm not. This sounds pretty big-headed, but I don't have any trouble thinking of stories. And because I like to write historical novels, there's no end of material. So I probably will write prequels. All I've got to do is give my character the McAlister name and set a connection with the books, and I can write. The thing about historical novels is that you just have to put your character into the exciting adventures that are around, that happened, and the story tells itself. Right.
Well, it's if you're gifted as a writer, I think that's true. I think whenever you find something simple, it's just because you're good at it. Like flying the plane. You put me behind those controls, I'd be like, no matter how much training I had. but you're gifted at writing, so it just flows and the creativity flows. So that's a great thing. Tell me a little bit about your flying career. Was it always in the Air Force, or were you a commercial pilot as well?
No, I was 9 years in the Air Force. I joined the Air Force straight out of school. It was the Vietnam War was in full swing, and the Air Force were looking for people for all the armed services in Australia, because we had quite a few thousand people up there, both in the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And I just sort of really didn't think about flying. My dad had been a pilot. He was a Spitfire pilot in World War II. But it never crossed my mind that, oh, yeah, that sounds like a good job. I never really just took him for granted.
Right.
And a friend of mine at school, on the last day at school, we were in Fremantle in West Australia, and he always wanted to fly. He was always banging on about flying, and he used to give me, I think I drove him crazy because he was always asking me about my dad. And I'd sort of say, oh, yeah, it's pretty, sort of casual about the whole thing. Anyway, he was going to the recruiting office in Perth, and I said, I'll come and keep you company. And so we went in the bus up there, got in there, and look, the guy said to me, he said, you've come to apply to join up? And I sort of said, well, no. And he said, well, why don't you? Anyway, the upshot was that I did all the aptitude tests of this guy, and they took me and they knocked this other guy back, which is it's a harsh world out there, isn't it?
Right. Right. Like I said, if you're talented or gifted at something, it comes easy to you and you feel like it comes easy to everyone, but that's not always the case. So,
sorry. So then I went on to fly with the military on heavy transports, Hercules, and then I did a helicopter tour in Vietnam. And then after that, after 9 years, I went into the airlines, and I flew with regional airlines for a long time. And then I went into the domestic airline, flying jets, all the usual suspects when it comes to jet transport. And then I wound up, the company I worked for closed in 2001. And I wound up getting a job on the Sunshine Coast, training cadets for Singapore Airlines to become airline pilots. And that's when I found out about this course at uni. So I said, that is for me.
Right.
Because when I was flying, when I first joined the airline as a junior first officer, all the captains were World War II, the last of the World War II pilots. And all they did was fly and play golf. They didn't do anything else. And there was a mandatory retirement age at 60. And these guys are all dead at 63.
Right.
And I said, right, when I get to 60, I don't want to be dead at 63. So I've got to make sure that I've got something very positive to go and do. And I'm not retiring. I'm just going on to a different phase of my life. And that's what I did.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It's funny. It seems like you fly everything and anything from single engine to fling wing to fixed wing to jet. You just, I think you fly more planes than most pilots, right? It seems like it's unusual to fly both a jet and a helicopter, right?
Yes and no. In the military, they do chop and change you around a bit. And it's most other airplanes, once you start flying jet airplanes, some are bigger and some are smaller, but in the end, they kind of are much the same. Right. So, but yes, I have flown a lot. I've got whole models on board here, just up the back.
Amazing.
So probably in that sense, it's been very interesting because I've always been changing, always had something new to think about, and also the different planes fly different routes. If you fly little things like the Fokker Friendship or the Fairchild, as you call it, you're around the regional or small centers, and then the bigger the plane, the bigger the places you go to. Yeah. So it's all very interesting, and you get to see so many different places.
What's your favorite aircraft to fly?
Now that's a good one. I'd say, I think I finished up on the 767, the Boeing 767, and that was just lovely to fly. It was just big cockpit, lots of room, and just a sheer joy to fly. But I love them all.
Yeah. The thrill of flying for me, I've flown quite a bit as a passenger, obviously, in my business. But being up in a helicopter has always been the biggest thrill of all. I felt like you really feel like you're flying in a helicopter because you pull off the ground, you can swoop down low. That's what I've always enjoyed. Do you feel the same way about helicopter flying?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because yes, helicopter flying is sort of once it's got away from the hover phase, it's just another aircraft.
Right.
But you don't ever have to look at any of the instruments. You can just think the aircraft around, just not quite like driving a car because you're doing it in three-dimensional, but
Right.
you just kind of think the airplane where you want it to go. When I was flying in Vietnam, we had an area operation of I don't know, probably about the size of one of your smaller states. Really, it wasn't huge, and so but it was all jungle and full of bad guys, and so we didn't ever use a compass. We just sort of say we'd head off in the direction where they on the map reference, and when we got there, the army guys on the ground would just throw up a smoke grenade, and we'd identify and come and land. So you really just thought about it rather than were analytical. Does that explain it?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. I from the pilots I've been with, when I'm up in a plane, they're checking their instruments a lot, but when I'm in a helicopter, he's just kind of guiding with his hands and his feet, and it's kind of like second nature. The instruments don't seem to matter as much. So yeah, you absolutely explained it well. Let's talk a little bit more about the McAlister series. One of the real life events you talk about are the Union Wars against the cane cutters. What made you look at that particular conflict?
Only that I had to get my character where he had to go, which was New Guinea in the end. And when I found out about these sort of things, I knew about them vaguely, just from a bit of historical knowledge. But so I started researching. And when I was at school, I was rubbish. Hated homework. I didn't like it at all. I was good at English and history and geography. The rest was something of a mystery. But when I went to uni, I changed. I loved research, absolutely loved it. I'd go into places. I could spend hours in the library and online looking at all the sites. And when I thought about the cane cutters, I just started Googling it and finding things. And I thought, yeah, there's a good story here. And there's so much information. There are reports, newspaper reports. For the military side, there are unit histories. There's so much information there that you can put together a really good sort of convincing story without it becoming a textbook. That's the thing you have to worry about. I've read some books and they describe the equipment and the kit down to the last little thing. And it drives my wife crazy. And she reads that, says, oh, look, I don't care about it. It's just a Tommy gun, for heaven's sake. And so I've had to make sure it was convincing, but not make it so it was bogged down with detail. And so the cane cutter, where I could say, yeah, there was lots of things happening, which I have explained. And then I thought, well, I can make a little story, sub-story out of that against the cane cutters and the Italian workers. And we've got a nice barroom incident, and away we go. There's a good little part of the story there.
Yeah, absolutely. Is your wife your first reader? When you're done with the book, do you give it to her to read?
Yeah, she reads it chapter by chapter. And,
chapter by chapter. Is she a tough critic, easy critic? Tell me about that.
Oh, she loves me. No, she's good. She's really good at she's really good at English, and so syntax is the thing she comes up with, and she's very good at the flow of it, and so she's an honest critic.
She's an honest critic, and it sounds like a good editor as well, which is helpful.
Yeah, she does. She goes through it, and I have about 4 editors who go through it, which is really good, and they all add their comments to the book, and occasionally they say, look, you better calm that bit down a bit. And sometimes they say, look, you have to be very careful when you're writing an adventure book. You don't start moralizing. Yeah. Even though there's bad, and even though I have my own opinions about lots of things, you don't put that into your book. That's not what it's for. The book is not for you to preach. The book is for you to entertain. Right. And if the reader gets a moral out of it, I guess they're
finding that on their own, right?
Well, when I was at uni, we did a thing called creative reading. I never heard of it before, but it seems like you can make a reading out of any book you want. Alice's Wonderland was great. You could make, if you're a communist, you could make a reading out of it. If you're a capitalist, you could make a reading out of it. And so in that case, I think, yes, well, you can. But I've tried to say, no, that is not the reason I write the books. I don't write the books so that people start analyzing them and digging around them. I want them to make it a page turner and go through it and they say, wow, I really enjoyed that. Lots of action, lots of fun, lots of good characters. And now I'll go and go down to the library or the bookstore and I'll buy the next one. That's my aim in my writing.
Well, I think you succeed for sure. They definitely are page turners. How did you come up with the idea for Filipino pirates in your story?
Oh, we were up at, they're still there. I've had friends that are sailors, and there's one guy who worked for Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong. And when he finished the job, he was a great sailor, and he actually sailed back, this big yacht of his, down through past the Philippines, past New Guinea, back down to Sydney. And he said that one of the things that they really had to be aware of was that the possibility of pirates being around. And so I said, well, rather you than me, I'll catch the plane, thank you. But so they are there. And I also started reading about, again, got back into research. And so I went to one page that led to another one, led to another, and I found out all this information about them. I thought, these guys are going to be really good bad guys.
And they are, and they are. Is there a favorite adventure or a favorite book or a favorite scene that you've written that you'd like to tell us about?
My favorite is, and I'll get it for you, if I can find it, is the third book in the series, the McAlister's Siege. This one here. And this is set at the end of the Korean War and the siege of Dien Bien Phu, where the French were beaten out of Vietnam before the big American build-up in there, which was probably 10 years later or 8 years later. And it's a time that nobody knows very much about, but there was a serious war going on in Vietnam between the French and the Vietnamese, the Viet Minh as they were called before they became Viet Cong. And it was a bloodbath. It was awful. And so I thought Dien Bien Phu, that is a really good place to put my characters because there was such an exciting time happened. You know, it was so exciting. I mean, it was terrifying. It was an awful thing, but it made a good story. And that was my favorite. I think by the time I got to the third book, I'd really settled into the Danny, Angela, Monty thing. And I was feeling really at ease at writing the book. It just flowed. I think I finished writing it in 3 or 4 months. Which is pretty quick for a 400-page book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like you said, you're in the zone. You had, 2 other books previous to kind of set everything up. So now it was all gelling and all coming together. Tell us about the character Mad Monty.
Well, Mad Monty, I just dreamed him up. I dreamed him up. He just came. I thought, we've got to have somebody, a good sort of foil for Danny, who's kind of a serious guy. Right. And Mad Monty just sort of came up. And I didn't even know about the Flying Red Tails. That was the Black American fighter squadron in the Second World War. And I just saw a movie article on it one day. I said, wow, now this could work. And so I dreamed him up, and he had to be eccentric. He had to be a little bit crazy, but a good buddy to have. And so he was the sort of, and I've met plenty of those in my Air Force career that were like that. So yeah, I wanted a guy who was a hero, but a good, light-hearted sort of bloke. Bloke who's at ease with the world, at ease with himself. Whereas Danny's in searching, whereas Monty's kind of found where he wants to be. Right. And so he was easy. He just came, and almost immediately I knew exactly who he was going to be, how it was going to work, and how the two of them were going to interact. Also, Danny, being a teenager, needed an adult mentor. He needed somebody to help him do the things he did. As a teenager alone, there's no way he could have done the things that happen in the book. It wouldn't have gelled properly. He did need to have a realistic thing that also we had to find some way to teach him how to fly and teach him how to get around.
Mm. Downey is you, at least in part, I'd guess, right?
It's going to be that, isn't it? I mean, every author who writes, they put themselves into, and yeah, Downey reminds me of when I was a teenager. Although I wasn't a big kid, like he's a tall kid, and I wasn't particularly. I was a bit of a pacifist, but like I say, I've been in 2 fights in my life and at school, and I won the first one and I lost the second one. If I'd lost the first one, I'd have been in 1 fight in my life. No, yeah, you put yourself in it, how you think about things, how would I react to the situations you're in, and I think that's true. It's you can't help but put some of yourself into the book. Well, you have to. You're writing it.
Yeah, exactly. It's your brain. It's your experiences, exaggerated, imagined, whatever it might be. But yeah, it's hard to keep yourself away from being the protagonist of your book, and you probably don't want to, because you know yourself better than most. So the nuances of the character, are going to be there if you're basing it on your own experience, which obviously in part you have.
Yes.
Have you written any other books, or has all?
Oh yeah, I've written.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, sorry, I've written 2 fantasy books. Mm-hmm. One's a comedy, and one's it's got fantasy books. I probably don't show up too well.
Well, they look great.
This was actually the very first story I wrote, but I wrote it 20 years ago, and it was a good story, but it was terribly written, so I had to rewrite it. Mm-hmm. And I've illustrated 2 books and published 2 illustrated books, and I've also illustrated books for other authors.
Wonderful, wonderful. Do you fly at all anymore?
I haven't flown for 15 years. People ask me, they say, "Oh, well, why don't you go there to Level Flying Club, jump in a Cessna?" And I go, I've flown the best equipment in the world. I've got 20,000 hours flying, 5,000 hours.
To prove.
No, nothing to prove in aviation at all. No, I'm quite happy to go down the back there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I actually knew some retired pilots. I think they'd lost their pilot's licenses, and they were flying in ultralights because you don't need a license to fly an ultralight, apparently, at least not in the States. So I think you've got the right perspective. You've flown every type of aircraft in every type of situation. You hang up your wings, that's fine, right?
Well, I think too, it's a job that you have to be on top of. When I was flying full time, there are lots of changes in aviation. In fact, I was playing golf with a buddy of mine who used to fly for Air Dubai, and he said he found the hardest bit now was keeping up with all the changes, that there are so many of them. So if you're only flying part-time, it means that you are going to have it even more difficult. And no, I'm quite happy to stay on the ground now. So
yeah, trade your pilot's cap for a writer's hat. It sounds like it's a good trade.
Well, I enjoyed university so much, and I enjoyed writing so much. I didn't have time to think about flying anymore, other than in the stories.
It's amazing. I went back and got my degree, my master's degree, as an adult in my 40s. And I enjoyed learning so much more as an older person than I did as a younger person.
Yeah, I found that exact same, as I said before. At school, I hated homework, I hated study. But when I was at university, maybe because you're doing it on your own terms.
Yeah.
Well, if you go back as a mature age student, you're going because you want to, and you've selected a course that you want to do, that you're really interested in. And whereas at school, you've got to go and do whatever the school curriculum is. And some things you like, and some things you don't like. Some things you learn, like calculus. I learned calculus at school. I was really good at it. I have no idea today what calculus is about.
Yeah, exactly. But you had the brain to do it the first time. That's all that matters. Yeah. Absolutely. Richard Marman is a fascinating man. He's a real life pilot, a real life hero, a real life veteran, and a terrific author. He has penned a thrilling series of books called McAlister's Way. You don't want to miss them. They tell the story of Downey McAlister, who is a real life hero who makes his way around the globe, makes his way through history. It is quite a series. It is quite an adventure. We'd like to see it on the big screen, or at least on the small screen in your living room someday. So Hollywood, if you're out there listening, get in touch with Richard Marman. Richard, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun chatting. I really enjoyed this morning.
I enjoyed it as well. You're a fascinating guy, like I said, and I always like to pick the brains of a person who is, one, intelligent, and two, has lived a interesting life as you have and as you do. So the conversation and the enjoyment is mutual, sir. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.
Visit www.greatwritersmedia.com. Email us at info@greatwritersmedia.com. Call us at 877-600-5469. Subscribe now.